Hello and welcome to The Stack. This week we speak with the editor-in-chief of Esquire magazine, plus a French title full of visionaries and creative freedom, and a travel company with their own magazine. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show talking with Michael Sebastian, editor-in-chief of Esquire magazine. The title has recently won the highest honor at this year's National Magazine Awards, and also Pulitzer, also for feature writing. Great talking with Michael about the title's 90-year legacy and how it is moving forward, and all about the new issue as well. Michael Sebastian, editor-in-chief of Esquire magazine. A pleasure to have you here. As I was telling you before, the most elegant covers in business.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Michael, let's start from the beginning. You've been editor since 2019, right? But you were working at Esquire before, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I became editor-in-chief in the summer of 2019. And prior to that, I was the digital director of Esquire.
That's amazing. And, you know, Esquire has such a long history. I mean, how many years already? It's over 90, right? Because you guys celebrated a few years ago the ninth kind of decade in a way.
Yeah, exactly. So we are, 92 years old this year. So we were founded in 1933, and we have our archive here in New York where we have every issue going back to that first one in the fall of 1933. It's kind of intimidating to look at, but it's also really awe-inspiring because in that first issue, you had Ernest Hemingway, who also wrote for the magazine for the first 20 years. There's F. Scott Fitzgerald in that archive. There's James Baldwin, Pablo Picasso. I mean, it's a wild heritage that we have.
And the brand, you know, of course, you mentioned 92 years old. It doesn't look tired. In fact, you know, I'm from Brazil. I know Esquire just published the Brazilian edition. So tell us a bit more. Is there's still space for growth at Esquire world, if I may say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So our global footprint is expanding, as you just pointed out. We just launched in Brazil. We're launching in other countries as well. But, you know, even beyond that, it's like, again, we're 92 years old, and it's, you know, part of running a heritage magazine. I know you've had people on before who have talked about this as well, but it's just like, you know, we need to honor that legacy, and we need to really kind of get down to what is the DNA of the brand, but we can't rest on our laurels. We can't be looking backwards. You know, one piece of advice that our creative director, Nick Sullivan, gave me when I started this job is that a lot of people romanticize the 1960s era of Esquire, and there's a lot to romanticize there. Harold Hayes was the editor. George Lois was the art director. They made those super iconic covers like Muhammad Ali covered in arrows or Andy Warhol in a soup can. What Nick said about that era, though, is that those editors weren't looking to the past for inspiration. They were looking to the here and now. They were meeting the moment. And that's what we need to do as well. Of course, we can be inspired by them, but at the same time, we need to meet the moment. And that's what Esquire has always been about, meeting the moment.
Oh, very well said. And you guys just won a National Magazine Award, so congratulations to that. That was quite an important one, right?
Absolutely. So we won a National Magazine Award for General Excellence, which is sort of like, you know, the Best Picture Oscar for the magazine business in the United States. And we actually just a couple of weeks ago, a story that we published won a Pulitzer Prize. So it was the very first time that Esquire has actually won a Pulitzer Prize in its 92-year history.
One thing I love, I've been, you know, flicking through the more recent issues. I mean, your fashion coverage is fantastic because it's such a nice balance between, of course, it's not all classic, it's not all suits, but it's also not only the opposite. We've happened quite a lot, only sportswear. I think there's such a nice kind of elegant balance. Is that the Esquire man that you're describing, perhaps, in a way?
Yeah. Absolutely, Fernando. So I'm glad that you noticed that and that you pointed that out because, you know, I think the thing about our guy, at least, is that, you know, certainly he's sophisticated. He has good taste. He wants to improve that taste, whether that's from the things that he reads or what he drinks, and certainly how he dresses, the clothes that he puts on his body. And, you know, he's not just only a traditional suit guy. He's not just a sportswear guy. I think this is the way that men want to dress, right? They don't want to just be compartmentalized into one thing, right? So it's like, you can get all dressed up in a suit and you want to feel really good, but at the same time, maybe you just want to wear sneakers and a t-shirt and a pair of jeans or something like that, or you want to combine those two. So we want to make sure that we remain elevated, but that also the clothes that the guys see in the magazine or on our website or on our Instagram are things that they want to wear. One thing that we like to say here is that when we feature clothes, again, in the magazine, on any of our digital expressions, anything like that they're not going to be clothes that if our guy goes out and buys them and then looks back at a picture of himself 5 years from now, doesn't say, what was I thinking? That they have certainly they're on trend, but there's also a timelessness to them.
One thing I was going to ask as well, because the US is a continental country. Of course, I believe Esquire is based in New York. What are your biggest markets? Is it just kind of the coasts, or do you also have, or the Esquire reader also perhaps live in other kind of states, from South Carolina to Texas? I don't know. What do you notice about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yes, we are based in New York. We're here in Manhattan. And I think that we certainly have a kind of New York cosmopolitan point of view. I think that that's definitely true. And our biggest readership is, in New York, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, which is not a coastal city, but it's a big cosmopolitan city. At the same time, I don't think that our readers are only in those places. And I know that not only from the data we see, but from the anecdotal data that I get. And the thing is that an Esquire man doesn't have to live in New York or LA or Chicago or something like that. They can live anywhere in the country. And I think that's something that we often hear about, is that whether it's somebody that lives in rural Alabama or who lives in Kansas City or something like that, is that they like the fashion that we're talking about. They like the stories that we're publishing. We do, we have these kind of iconic lists that we've done for a long time. One of them is the best new restaurants in America, and another one is the best bars in America. And we've sort of expanded that. We do best martinis in America and so on. And we want to make them the definitive lists. And when I say definitive lists, what I mean is that we have writers and critics and experts who fan out across the country every year. Right now, we're reporting on our best new restaurants list that we will publish at the end of the year. And right now, we've got guys who are men and women who are out there, in the country eating at all of these restaurants. And it would be super easy for us to kind of just pick restaurants that are in New York or LA or Chicago or something like that. But we want to make sure that we have a geographic diversity that reflects not only the country and the restaurant business, but also reflects the readership.
Well, you're talking about lists. I was reading your kind of best hotels guide, or a selection of nice hotels. I really want to stay at the Hotel Yellowstone. That article sold it for me.
It's amazing, right?
Beautiful. I need to go to Wyoming, actually. Another thing, this Esquire man has a sense of humor, and I ask because I love one of my favorite kind of sections of the magazine is at the back page. The Esquire editorial board endorses. I really had fun reading the pharmaceutical commercials one. That was really interesting.
Thank you for noticing that. So that goes back actually right when I started, is that the idea of that is to be playful and to be humorous. And what it really is kind of a parody of the very self-serious editorial boards at newspapers, which are obviously talking about very important issues. And what we want to do is we want to approach that kind of seriousness to, kind of mundane topics or endorsing things that we might not already endorse or something along those lines. I remember we had one where we endorsed climate change, and it was global warming or something like that, and that was a really funny one because it had to just be pitch perfect, right? Because like the reader had to know that we weren't seriously endorsing climate or global warming, but also had to read it in a way where like it was going to make them laugh and it was going to seem as if we were being self-serious. So thank you for noticing that.
No, I love it. Well, let's talk about the new issues, the summer edition with another great cover. Bono, sorry, I have to say this again, Michael. I love your covers. I mean, and I do judge magazines by their covers. What can you tell us about the summer edition?
Yeah, I just want to pause for a moment on the cover conversation that we're having, and I'll get to the summer cover in just a moment. I'm so glad that you pointed that out because, in a world where, magazines are now everywhere. They're not just in print. They're not just at a newsstand. You see them. We have all these digital expressions. We have in-person expressions. But the cover remains so important because that is our billboard. That is the thing that people see. Again, whether it's in person or whether it's on their phones and so on. And, early on in my tenure, what I wanted to make sure that we did was really establish what the Esquire cover is going to look like, at least in this era of the brand. Because again, Esquire covers are known as being iconic. There was an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art a few years ago that was just Esquire covers. So there's a high bar to cross here. And that's why I'm really glad that you have pointed out that, that I think that we continue to achieve that. So to your question about the summer cover is that Bono is on our cover, who is obviously, an icon. You could even say he's a legend. And that was a really fun one because we actually shot him in and around his estate in the south of France. So he gave us access to that. And the photographer Anton Corbin photographed him. And for those who don't know, Anton himself is a legend of the photography world. He shot the Joshua Tree art and he shot Bono throughout the years. So it was really kind of bringing these two together again. And I think what it created was an intimacy you don't normally see with these kinds of, larger than life personas.
And one kind of business question as well, Michael, again, because of the US and its size, do you still sell a lot of Esquire in the newsstands? Because I know also subscription is a big business in the US, perhaps more than here in Europe. How is that divide going on at the moment?
Yeah. So the balance of our, or I should say the prevalence of our readership in print is subscription based. You're right about that. We do still sell a lot of newsstand copies. Certainly we sell a lot of newsstand copies. I mean, you go to any newsstand in the US and Esquire is there, almost any in the US and it's there. And, really where you see kind of the majority of those sales are in airports, train stations, and bookstores, right? Like those are the three places where people are buying Esquire magazine.
And if I may ask finally, perhaps this question is a bit of what are you reading at the moment? Do you read other magazines? Are you a fan of other titles, or perhaps you're more kind of a books kind of guy?
I'm glad that you asked that. I am a voracious reader of all things, right? And feel like, you got to constantly be learning and constantly be thinking about what's next in this job and so on. And yes, I read other magazines. I love New York Magazine. There is a French magazine. I'm sure you are a fan of it. Your listeners are, called L'Etiquette, which is
it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I read Monocle. Let's see. And then, some kind of smaller ones. I'll read Harper's. I'll read The Atlantic, which is not small, but, and then books, constantly reading books. And in fact, right now I'm in the middle of The Plot Against America by Philip Roth, which was published 15 or 20 years ago or something like that. And it's such a prescient read. I won't get into the plot of it. That's boring for your readers, but I feel like people in the U.S., all around the world should be reading this book right now. So yeah, does that answer your question about my reading habits?
Absolutely. You have very good reading habits. And thank you for mentioning Monocle. Michael, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us here at Monocle. Thank you very much, Michael. It's been a pleasure. And keep going with the elegant covers. Their summer issue with Bono is out now. And now we head to France to speak with the man behind Alphabet magazine. The recently published second edition offers space of freedom and creativity for a selected group of visionaries from fields such as art and architecture, from Willem Dafoe to Marisa Berenson. The list is extensive. It was a pleasure talking with both Donatien Grau, editor-in-chief and artistic director of the magazine, and Thomas Lenthal, their creative director. Hello, we have Donatien Grau and Thomas Lenthal on the line to talk about Alphabet magazine. Donatien, you're the editor-in-chief and artistic director, and Thomas, you're the creative director. Perhaps I'll start with you, Donatien. I want you to introduce Alphabet to our audience, because I was reading your editor's letter, the magazine of magazines. It's such an interesting concept. But tell us more. Give us kind of a brief introduction to Alphabet.
So, Alphabet stems from two very simple principles. A, there is no magazine in which artists would be in the driving seats and therefore would be in charge of, all the sections. They're always, journalists. And we thought it would be interesting to place artists in the driving seat and really be in the position of, taking on all the sections of a magazine. And then the other thing we felt is that, the format of the magazine is now a complicated one. The traditional sections of the magazine are becoming increasingly old-fashioned and dépassé. So we wanted to reinvigorate them by giving them to artists so that, in this issue, astrology is done by Hito Steyl. The previous issue, music was done by Yoji Yamamoto. Or, any other artist done by Willem Dafoe, etc. There would be this perception of art across the creative community and giving these extraordinary figures we both admire so much a platform in which they could manifest their own creativity.
And Thomas, I want to ask you as a creative director, because as Donatien was saying, basically the magazine is an open platform to all those incredible artists, visionaries. But that makes it quite exciting for you as well, because every issue will be quite different perhaps in style as well.
Yes, totally different, I expect. That's even to the point where when you start a magazine, you're like, one of the very mundane question is, how's the logo of the magazine? What should it look like? We had this conversation from the get-go and we thought, there's no logo. I mean, whoever does the cover does the logo. So that pretty much, to a certain degree, sums up what this is all about. You handle the key to the magazine to that creative community, basically. And of course, it yields, I suppose, very different results from one issue to the next. And this is sort of the way that the cover is being assigned to any given artist yields a completely different result. So yeah, absolutely. I guess that's the beauty of it. I wouldn't call it randomness because it's not random, but it's just it's really exciting to see what they're going to come up with. Obviously, this is only issue number 2, but I think it's very promising.
Before I ask Donatien more about issue 2, I just want to have a quick one with you, Thomas, because I know you worked in many titles, from Numéro to System, but is this quite a different magazine to make then?
Completely different. It's the polar opposite of what I've spent my life doing professionally with magazines. With magazines, you basically, as far as my experience goes, it's always about, let's see what it is we want to talk about. What is the current conversation? Then let's assign whoever makes most sense for any given topic that we feel would be of interest. And with Alphabet, it's not quite like that. It's more of what would be a wonderful assemblage. I'm not sure it's the correct term because it feels a bit alcohol and spirits, but it's putting together people from very different horizons and trying to find kind of the perfect dinner, the perfect party, if you will. And this is quite different. It's not about, so we don't exactly know what it is they will be, what conversation they'll engage in, but it's that. It's you put together that community of people and you give them a very light frame, which is basically the section of the magazine. So as Donatien was saying, the sections are very kind of classic sections of a fairly normal magazine. The section, even they're as pedestrian as we as you could think. It's literally horoscope and travels and poetry and music and cinema and so on, and art and so on and so forth. But then the tension with what it is these people bring to the table is what makes it exciting.
And Donatien, I want to ask, because I know, you worked in many museums from the Louvre to the d'Orsay. How much that work at museums kind of instruct your job as an editor-in-chief of a magazine? Was it quite helpful? Because is that the first magazine you work or not?
No, definitely not. I've guest edited a very large number of publications, across fields from scholarship to more, popular publications. But I think that the key to this was that the premise of this project was 10 years ago, and I think this is an important thing to say, over 10 years ago, actually, Thomas and I met and we got on very well. And he invited me to do what is today the last issue of Paradis, and it was an extraordinary and still is an extraordinary thing we did because It was called Potential Museums. We invented a large number of figures to invent new museums. The very, very thick volume that is bordering on not being a magazine anymore. So we told ourselves, what if we do something that is actually a real magazine, almost like a caricatural magazine, but then, of course, completely the opposite to it at the same time. And that's kind of what we did. And I think, in a way, this sort of brings together all those elements from what we have done together, what we have learned working through that. And when you talk about my work in museum, I think the work when you're a museum executive, as I am, is that you are at the service of the structure you work for, of the institution you work for. In that sense, for me, the very point of Alphabet was to be a space of freedom. And that was really, really key. And the other thing that was important as well is that, you mentioned that museum person, I'm also a scholar. And I think, one of the things that Thomas and I really get on well on is that Thomas is a very serious and precise person in many ways. And so we wanted that level of precision to sort of guide what the magazine is and what it is about.
One thing that I'm surprised, and of course, as you said, is not a random selection, is the incredible contributors. How did it work? Did you and Thomas had a conversation, said, you know what, we would love to have William Dafoe in the title? Did someone sometimes perhaps approach you? How was that selection of the talent, which is, essential for a magazine like Alphabet?
Well, it just... there is also something very simple and a little candid, which is very community-based, Like a lot of the contributors are people we're actually very friendly with. And so in many ways, this magazine is a platform for all these conversations, friendships that we have. And I must say, I don't know if Thomas would agree, but for me, it's very, very organic. Like it happens this way because we have all those conversations and because at some point things fall into place. And really, there's no recipe. Of course, every issue has its own color, in a way, its own perspective. Like the first issue was more experimental in a way. The second is more set, like it is a real second issue. The third will be a different. And I think that it's important that each issue has its personality. And I would say its own atmosphere. There's something sort of quite atmospheric about them.
Well, and I do agree. And Thomas, I was going to ask you, there's so many things to choose. If you had a highlight, perhaps, from issue 2. For example, I loved the poetry from José Tolentino Mendonça because I was talking to a friend of mine, and then I got the issue. I was pleasantly surprised to see him at the magazine.
Well, yes, obviously, this one stands out because you don't see that many cardinals in magazines. So yes, it's quite remarkable as a symbol also. But to me, something that I felt strongly for, because it also has to do with my professional background, is Peter Saville's contribution. And I thought he came up because in each issue, we're giving the alphabets to a member of the creative community. And for issue 1, we had Claire Fontaine. And for issue 2, Peter Saville, which is kind of obvious because Peter Saville is an art director and has been dealing in typography for his entire life. And so that was kind of a fairly reasonable commission for him. But he came up with something that is quite fascinating, whereby he, for each letter of the alphabet, choose a specific font that he had been working with for a specific project. And so letter A starts with something from the early 80s and then up to Z, which is, I can't remember which font he used for Z, but a font he used for a very recent project. So you can see kind of a sort of a history of typeface in the work of Peter Saville, the whole thing being chronological. I thought was sort of very exciting to both commission, even though we weren't the ones telling Peter, you should be doing this, but he came up with a couple of ideas and we immediately thought, oh, this is really, really the thing we'd like to see in Alphabet.
Well, and Donatien, if I may ask the same question to you, if there were any kind of highlights you'd like to mention for issue 2 as a taster here.
I always have a problem with the notion of a highlight. I think for me, what's extraordinary rather is the experience of going from one of those, pieces to the other. And I think the way you can experience the magazine is that you can go from the first contribution, and that's Lina Gottme, the very celebrated architect, to the last, which is Sarah Z, the extraordinary artist. So that's one way to go, or you could just, look across the issue and discover things, experience things, try things. And I think what's most particular is really having a shared home for these figures across the creative community, which is honestly a relatively rare thing. You do have literary publications, you have architecture publications, you have fashion publications, you have art publications, you have design publications, but you rarely have a publication in which you have figures from across the creative community. And this is what we've aimed to do with Alphabet.
Well, and I love that mixture as well. One question, I don't know who can answer this better, because even the advertising in the magazine is very well thought through. You have a lot of art institutions, but then, I don't know, the restaurant Le Voltaire at the end. And I thought that was quite cool because they make Alphabet quite unique. It felt to me that even you guys were selecting who you wanted as your advertisers as well.
That was one of the first things Donatien told me, and I was like, what are you talking about, Donatien? He said, the advertising needs to be as curated as the content. And I was like, how's that going to happen? And well, it did happen. And in fact, you're absolutely right. It's absolutely essential to the ecosystem of the magazine. This notion of advertising being almost a curatorial exercise. But I'll leave Donatien to go further into this.
Well, thank you. I mean, I would say it was indeed a key part to what this is, because, as I just said at the beginning, precision is a very important part of who Thomas is and of what I tried to do. And therefore, it was important for us that all those things that, may come across as, random or, just governed by fate be taken on in a serious, committed way. So, for example, of course, the advertisement is something we thought through, and we wanted the diversity. We also wanted these companionships, because we don't see advertisers as advertisers. We see them actually as partners in this endeavor. And it's the same story for the distribution, because, the distribution is, in the same way governed by a choice. Like there is a regular standard distribution, which happens. And then we ask each of the participants to tell us about bookstores or places where they would like the magazine to be. And that is remarkable, because then it means that we end up in places that are not where you would see a regular magazine across fashion and culture. And that, I think, is also a very sort of important thing of what we do.
And another unique approach there. Listen, Donatien and Thomas, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us. Very good. Thank you very much, Donatien and Thomas. And for more information, go to alphabet-magazine.com. And now to the world of travel. We welcome Tom Barber, co-founder of Original Travel, a travel company specialized in tailor-made holidays, and they also print their own magazine, Original Traveler, a beautiful companion of travel stories from Brazil to Namibia. It was a pleasure to hear from Tom about the delights of a beautiful brochure, the importance of print, and of course, the latest in travel trends. Tom Barber, co-founder of Original Travel, welcome to Monocle Radio. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I know you've been to the office before, but now you're a guest officially. My first question to you is, tell us a bit more. You started your career in journalism, right? How was that move, to found your own company?
It was a very good move, actually. I loved being a journalist, but I was freelance, earning next to nothing, desperately in need of a proper gig. And a friend of mine who was in the city quit. Couldn't stand it anymore, and we were in the pub one night with another friend who'd been in the army, and we were just like, we need to do something different. And it's that kind of slightly classic cliche story of travel, something we all loved, all had complementary skills. Here we are 22 years later, but I think I'm deeply uncommercial. I'm very happy to admit that, but I brought the brand language, the tone of voice, and funnily enough, probably the greatest encouragement of the three of us that print would have a strong part to play in the journey.
And the way I framed the first question, to be fair, they're not perhaps that different what you did as a journalist in a way, right? Because you did write about travel. You worked for Condé Nast Traveler as well.
No, weirdly, I worked at Condé Nast in Vogue House for on and off for 4 or 5 years. And I worked for Tatler, GQ, Brides, House and Garden, everyone bar Condé Nast Traveler. So that was a little bit ironic, but it started while I was there, and I remember looking covetously at this amazing new magazine. And I used to write a little bit of travel for Brides. And there was a time when someone actually wrote into Brides magazine and said, I can't believe you've got this guy, Tom Barber, he's been on 2 honeymoons this year. What sort of example is that? And we had to write and explain that I hadn't actually been on honeymoon. But yeah, so I wasn't writing necessarily about travel. I did a lot of lifestyle stuff. I used to write for the Evening Standard as well.
Before we talk about some of the lovely print material that Original Travel does, I would like you to give us an introduction about, I know it's a travel company, but tell us what makes you guys unique perhaps in the market today.
It's a crowded market. There's a lot of travel companies around, as you know. We would like to think that what we do is, there's a lot of chat about curated travel and tailor-made, but truly, truly tailor-made travel. So you come to us with an idea or even an inkling of an idea or a time of year or an emotion you want to experience, and we put the whole thing together from scratch. There's no kind of foundation blocks that we build upon. It is literally a blank sheet of paper at the beginning, and the job of my consultants is to coax out what it is you really want, because we sometimes don't quite say what we mean. And so actually getting to the nub of what people really want to do is crucial. And then we literally put it together from scratch. It's an amazingly exciting experience. And as the boss, I read every single bit of feedback from every single client who goes away. 99% of those are an amazing read. And I then reply to them and say, thank you so much, because I've always said, if you buy a car or a watch or something like that and it breaks, you just send it back. You can't replace a holiday. That's time spent. It's gone. And we may be able to give you
value time, right?
Exactly. Particularly nowadays, everyone's busier than they've ever been. So it's a massive responsibility, but it's amazing when you read the feedback of someone having had a pretty epic time.
Tom, do you focus on a specific part of the world at Original Travel, or you're fairly kind of...
It's broad brush. We probably, we wouldn't sell anywhere. We have to know it personally. There's probably about 85 countries that we sell and know very well. Like I say, totally tailor-made. So really anything goes. You could be a family, you could be a couple, solo traveller, 3G, we call it 3-generational travel. One thing we're seeing more and more is actually bonding holidays. So that's 2 members of the same family, but it could be father and daughter or grandmother and grandson, or something I've done myself actually a couple of times in the last few years is, as a grown-up child, taken both my, hope they won't mind me saying, aged parents away on individual holidays with them. And that's a real theme. And some of the feedback we get from bonding holidays is just off the charts, because it's sometimes an opportunity when you're away from the normal locations where you see each other that allows you to maybe speak a bit more honestly, talk about some things you may not have talked about over the years, and really kind of get to the nub of things. And it's very, very profound. Actually, both the holidays I had with my parents were unbelievable, and I like to think they enjoyed them as much as I did.
I completely relate, especially when, for example, I live far away from my parents in a different country. So when we meet, it's actually the holidays, go traveling together. Let's talk about, I think what makes your company as well unique is the value that you give to print. And in a way that's, again, it's the connection with your customer who wants something, because everything that is in print, that is tangible, perhaps might feel better than just looking at a massive PDF file online. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, you're preaching to the converted.
Yes.
When we started, we were three guys, like I said, in a spare bedroom, that kind of classic cliche startup. And we invested half the investment money we had into a print brochure. So this is 2003, when the internet's around, but it's not the be-all and end-all yet. And our brochure won the Guardian Observer Best Travel Brochure of the Year award that year. So we gave off this essence of being quite a serious player, right from the beginning, even though we were just three guys in a spare bedroom, we started with a very good idea, but the brochure was unbelievably instrumental in getting us kick-started. So, yeah, ever since then, we've loved print. And, of course, I was always going to persuade the others and
your journalist side,
exactly.
It never left you.
But, I mean, why wouldn't you like print? You guys are so amazing. The last time I was in the office was for the launch of your Spain book, and it was a thing of beauty. Everything about it, the touch, the smell, everything. There's something profound about print. And I'm a big believer that we're in an age of overcorrection. So everyone was like, print's dead, we're all going to go online and digital. And no, we're not. People are going to remember that print serves a purpose and a function. Well, more than that, it's not functional, it's beautiful, it's aesthetic.
Especially when it comes to travel, for example, which you need to see beautiful images to be convinced to go somewhere. I'm looking here at issue 4 of Original Traveler, which is your magazine, right? We can call it that.
100%.
100%.
It ain't a brochure.
It's definitely, because you have, the brochures are also very beautiful.
Thank you.
But tell us about issue 4. It's about the simple pleasures issue. And yes, when you read, you almost forget that this is related necessarily to a company or is just a commercial. It's a beautiful title. It's good articles. It's fun to read.
Thank you. I very much wanted it to feel like an old school magazine. So, we have front of book, we have the well. All the photography in there is commissioned by us. We're very lucky that I have a parent company who are equally appreciative of print. And so I have access to an amazing photo library, designers. It just makes my life incredibly easy. I'm like the kind of kid in the sweet shop. But yeah, they come out at the beginning of January each year, which is traditionally speaking when people start thinking about holidays. And, you can never, it's not like a digital piece of marketing where you can actually track. But we know for a fact that we see who gets copies of the magazine and we track who books off the back of them. And it's a huge correlation.
How does this distribution works for your title?
So we have a database that goes to anyone who's inquired or booked with us in the past. We occasionally do lookalikes, so we send it to people who have similar postcodes, etc. Funnily enough, literally as of 2 days ago, it's now on the shelves in the lounge at Eurostar because we're big on train travel, flight-free travel. If you can get to parts of Europe within a day or so, and obviously you're working on the train, so it's WFT, we would always encourage that you take the train instead of flying. So Eurostar is an amazingly important partner for us because none of that's possible without the Eurostar. So we're now in the lounges, London, Paris and Brussels. And I'm really excited about that. And there's a train brochure coming later this year, which will be dedicated entirely to train travel, specifically designed to tie in with the 200th anniversary of the first ever passenger train in September this year. So very excited about that.
And the locations featured on issue 4 are amazing. I'm very happy the Brazil's in there with Salvador.
Of course, front and centre.
Beautiful, beautiful city. Namibia. I've been dreaming about Namibia, so I'm so glad that you wrote. You've been to Namibia, right?
I have. A friend of mine invested in an unbelievably beautiful desert lodge there about 25 years ago, before we even started the company. And he got back and he showed me these photos, and it's stunning. Those landscapes are epic. And I said to him, yeah, that looks amazing. What do you do? And he said, you don't do anything. You sit and admire the view. And it's not about safari. There are amazing areas. There's a lot of desert adapted species like desert rhinos, desert elephants. But really, it's the landscapes. It's a landscape safari destination. And those colours, evening light on those amazing deserts is just astonishing. And there's one lodge where they do something called Serenity, and they take you off in a 4x4 and they plonk you in a director's chair with a cocktail of whatever you want, and they just leave you there to sit and watch the sunset for an hour or two. And it is epic. You must go.
I really must. And I was going to ask you, maybe you can't say Namibia now, but if someone is listening to this and want to plan a trip for the summer, do you have a recommendation? It can be quite a personal one.
Well, if it's for summer, then I would always recommend you stay short haul, probably, and do Europe. But what we are increasingly finding and increasingly encouraging is for people not to just go to the Med. It's so hot nowadays. Every summer it seems to be touching 40 degrees. And so I'm making it my personal mission to try and spread people out, get them to the slightly less obvious corners. Weirdly, I can tie this in with that evening, the Monocle event to launch the Spain book. I met the ambassador that evening and I said to him, where do discerning Spaniards go in Spain? And he said, don't tell anyone, Galicia. I went, well, I'm very glad you said that because I'm going there in 2 days on a research trip. And off I went, and it's just stunning. It's like Ireland in some ways, because it's called Green Spain, that part of Spain, because it gets a lot of rain. So, it's not perfect by any means, but it makes it an entirely different vibe to the south or Andalusia, where it's all about scorching heat. It's incredibly beautiful, amazing fishing villages, astonishing walking along incredible routes, both inland and along the sea, seafood like you wouldn't believe, and then Santiago de Compostela, this incredible pilgrimage city, which is just like something out of a fairy tale. And that was, I already had a hunch that this was going to be a cool trip, but then to get it from the ultimate source at a Monocle it was fairly perfect.
I'm putting Galicia on my list for sure. Tom, I would like to ask you, because, among some of the material I have, there's also a book that you guys published, A Cruise in the Nile. I wonder if you can talk about this one and if it's part of your future projects to also invest in other books potentially.
Well, invest in other books, but also invest in other properties. So my parent company bought this boat, the steamship Sudan, about 20 years ago. It was languishing on the Nile in Cairo, in desperate need of some love and attention. And my ultimate boss was walking past. He said, "What's that?" And some guy on the quayside said, "That's the steamship Sudan. It's the last surviving paddle steamer from the golden age of Egypt travel." It was owned by Thomas Cook. Agatha Christie went on that very boat, and that's what inspired her to write Death on the Nile. And she's been completely restored and is now, obviously I'm slightly biased, but I think it's one of the great travel experiences. It's like time travel. You're seeing these astonishing sights as you get off along the Nile between Luxor and Aswan. But the boat itself is part of the history. It's been beautifully restored, but the engine room is all exactly the same as when it was built in the 20s it was built in Paisley, which was, at the time on the Clyde, was the kind of, literally the heartland of shipbuilding. The staff wear these beautiful liveried outfits with fezzes, and it's just an incredible, incredible experience. And so we just thought, well, we have to write a book about this. And so, as you can see there, it's a beautiful coffee table book, amazing imagery. But actually, the first book we ever published was 4 years after we started, so 2007. And we'd won Best Brochure for the first 3 years. And we were slightly like, well, what can we do next? And so we thought, let's write a book. I've got the experience. We've got the know-how. No travel company had ever written a book before. And so we published a book about our big idea at the time, which was Big Short Breaks, which was like maximum experience in minimum time, amazing long weekends. And so the book came out. I'm not going to tell you it was a bestseller because it significantly wasn't, but it's one of my most treasured items. I've still got a couple of copies at home. Again, it's just another example that print to us has always been front and centre. And finally, Tom, I just want to ask you, I want to talk about travel trends. What's in your view? We have train travel. We have perhaps, we can still stay in Europe, but maybe not mad in the summer. What is your customers looking for these days? Do they want peace and quiet? Do they want a buzzing city? Are there any trends you're seeing? Well, peace and quiet is definitely next week's newsletter is a concept we coined called pin drop travel. So we quite like the idea of a pin being dropped as the kind of moniker of travel now, you like on a Google map, but then being able to hear a pin drop is obviously a signifier of peace and solitude. So that's something we're very big on. And then probably my favourite of our kind of mantras at the moment is the Secret series, which is all about the fact that you don't have to go to the ends of the earth. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're not constantly looking for new countries. We are thinking about the obviously wonderful destinations. So your Greece, Spain, USA, Japan, and finding the corners of those countries that are unexplored. Because unfortunately, we have a problem where Instagram and other things mean we are just funneling too many people into too few places in too short spaces of time. And the example I always use is if you fly into Naples, obviously you can head to the Amalfi Coast You'll be there within an hour, but so will 8 trillion other people, camera-toting tourists, clogging everything up. But you fly into Naples and go 2 hours south, and you are in a totally, totally unspoilt part of the country. And again, that's where the discerning Italians are going. So, you don't even need to fly somewhere completely different. Fly to the same place, go in the opposite direction, and it's amazing how easy it is to get off the beaten track. And that, for me, as someone in travel, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So we want to be getting people it's not even a massive volte-face, it's just a change of direction, and you can find somewhere very special. That's really, for me, that's the key at the moment.
Thank you very much, Tom. For more on original travel, go to originaltravel.co.uk. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks to our editor, Elliot Greenfield. And if you have any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. We'll be back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always subscribe to The Stack on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on monocle.com. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. It's goodbye from me.